Admiral Krelthax stood at the panoramic viewing port of the GSS Inevitable Victory, his forearms clasped behind his back, as he observed the peculiar blue planet below. "Absolutely primitive," he announced to the bridge crew, his mandibles clicking in amusement. "Would you believe they still use combustion engines? And their primary source of food production relies on manually disturbing dirt with metal sticks." Captain Melthora, his communications officer, approached with a datapad. "Sir, our initial scans confirm your assessment. Their most advanced weapon systems barely qualify as Tier 3 technology, and their space presence is limited to a few orbital stations that look like they were assembled by children playing with building blocks." "How quaint," the Admiral chuckled, his crystalline eyes reflecting Earth's continents as they passed beneath the cloaked vessel. "And to think, the Council actually expressed concerns about this conquest. They even insisted we bring the Crimson Legion." At the mention of the elite force, several bridge officers straightened their postures. The Crimson Legion, the pride of the Galactic fleet, had never failed a planetary subjugation in their thousand-cycle history. Their powered armor could withstand direct hits from nuclear weapons, and their neural-linked plasma rifles could predict target movements 3 seconds before they occurred. "Speaking of the Legion," Lieutenant Prezax interrupted, approaching with another datapad. "Commander Vexator reports they are ready for deployment. All 30,000 troops are armed and waiting in their dropships." Admiral Krelthax waved one of his lower arms dismissively. 30,000? We could probably take this planet with 30. Look at their largest military gathering." He gestured to the main view screen, where satellite imagery showed a rural area in what their databases identified as Iowa. "Their strongest concentration of humans appears to be gathering in fields, with primitive tools." The bridge crew gathered around the display, their collective confusion manifesting in a symphony of clicking mandibles and twitching antennae. The footage showed humans walking through vast stretches of agricultural land, carrying various implements that their database identified as pitchforks, hoes, and something called a combine harvester. "Sir," Captain Melthora said, her voice carrying a note of professional concern, "should we perhaps conduct more detailed surveillance before—" "Nonsense," Admiral Krelthax declared, all 4 arms gesturing expansively. "These humans haven't even mastered basic antimatter containment. Their most advanced computing systems still use silicon, and their primary means of defense in that population center appears to be an elderly human carrying a pointed stick." The bridge crew chittered in amusement, the sound echoing off the crystalline walls of the command deck. Their advanced civilization, with its quantum computers, zero-point energy reactors, and biomechanical enhancements, was about to add another primitive world to the Galactic Federation's growing empire. "Prepare for first contact protocols," Admiral Krelthax commanded, his mandibles forming what passed for a smirk in his species. "Let's show these humans what real power looks like. And someone wake up the Crimson Legion, though I doubt we'll need them for more than crowd control." Little did the Admiral know that elderly human with the pointed stick was about to become the stuff of galactic legend. The GSS Inevitable Victory dropped its cloaking field along with the rest of the fleet, 300 ships materializing in Earth's orbit like a constellation of metallic stars. Admiral Krelthax savored the moment, imagining the panic spreading across the primitive planet below. "Captain Melthora, begin the standard surrender broadcast. All frequencies, all languages." "Yes, Admiral," she replied, her claws dancing across the crystalline control panel. "Broadcasting now." The message boomed across every radio frequency, television channel, and electronic device on Earth. "Attention inhabitants of Sol 3. This is Admiral Krelthax of the Galactic Fleet. Your planet has been selected for integration into the Galactic Federation. Surrender now and become productive members of galactic society. Resistance will be met with overwhelming force. You have 1 planetary rotation to comply." The bridge crew waited expectantly for the usual response: panic, chaos, desperate pleas for mercy. Instead, they received a single video transmission from that same cluster of agricultural structures they'd observed earlier. "Putting it on screen now, Admiral," Captain Melthora announced, sounding puzzled. The main view screen flickered to life, showing a weather-beaten human face partially hidden under something their database identified as a John Deere cap. The human appeared to be sitting on a porch, drinking from a glass of brown liquid filled with ice cubes. "Well now," the human drawled, setting down his glass. "Name's Buck Martinez, and I'm president of the Iowa Farmers Association. We got your message about surrendering and such." He paused to spit something brown into a cup. "And Old Man Henderson here has something to say about that." The camera panned to reveal an elderly human male, leaning on a well-worn pitchfork. He wore overalls covered in dirt stains, and his face was a topographic map of wrinkles earned from decades under the sun. "You folks picked a bad time to invade," Henderson announced, casually adjusting his grip on the pitchfork. "Right in the middle of harvest season." Admiral Krelthax's mandibles twitched in disbelief. "Are they actually threatening us with primitive farming implements?" The video continued as Henderson gestured at the vast cornfields behind him. "See all this corn? Been growing corn on this land since my daddy's time. And let me tell you something about corn." He stabbed his pitchfork into the ground for emphasis. "It gets mighty annoying when folks try to interrupt the harvest." Lieutenant Prezax leaned closer to the screen. "Sir, I believe they're attempting to employ psychological warfare through agricultural intimidation." "Got that right, Bug Eyes." Henderson's voice crackled through the speakers. "And I ain't about to let some fancy space army mess up my crop rotation schedule. So here's our terms. You all can either turn those pretty ships around and go home, or you can come down here and see why we call these heartland values." The transmission ended with Henderson returning to his rocking chair and taking a long sip from a mason jar filled with something the ship's computer couldn't identify. Admiral Krelthax stood in stunned silence for exactly 3 seconds before bursting into chittering laughter. "They're sending farmers? Against the Crimson Legion?" He turned to his command staff, all 4 arms spread wide. "This will be the easiest conquest in fleet history. Commander Vexitor, prepare your troops for immediate deployment. Target that gathering of agricultural workers first. Let's show them exactly how outmatched they are." As the orders went out, Captain Melthora made a curious observation. "Sir, our threat assessment algorithms are giving unusual readings about that human with the pitchfork." "Ignore it," the Admiral commanded. "What could one primitive farmer possibly do against the most elite fighting force in the galaxy?" The answer, as they would soon discover, was quite a lot. Drop pods from the Crimson Legion pierced Earth's atmosphere like artificial meteors, their quantum-stabilized hulls glowing red-hot. Commander Vexitor led the first wave, his flagship pod carrying 100 of his most elite warriors. "Remember your training," he broadcast to his troops. "These primitives have never seen anything like our N7 battle arrays." The pods landed in a perfect hexagonal pattern around the target zone, creating impact craters in several unfortunately positioned cornfields. As the dust settled, the pods split open like metallic flowers, revealing the most feared fighting force in 3 galactic arms. Each legionnaire stood 3 meters tall in their powered armor, the crimson plates shifting and flowing like liquid metal. Their helmets featured sensory arrays that could detect a mouse breathing from 2 kilometers away, and their plasma rifles hummed with enough power to level small buildings. Micro-singularity generators in their gauntlets could create localized gravity wells, and their boot thrusters allowed them to leap tall structures in a single bound. "First platoon, establish perimeter," Commander Vexitor ordered, his own armor gleaming in the midday sun. "Second platoon, advance on target. Show these primitives what real warriors look like." And then, through the cornfield directly ahead of them, came Old Man Henderson. He walked with the unhurried pace of someone who'd spent decades following the rhythm of the seasons rather than military orders. His pitchfork rested casually on one shoulder, and he paused occasionally to inspect an ear of corn. My, Henderson called out, his voice carrying across the field. "You folks sure made a mess of my South 40. He clicked his tongue disapprovingly. "Those craters are going to play havoc with the irrigation system." Commander Vexitor activated his external speakers. In the name of the Galactic Federation, surrender or be— Hold that thought, son, Henderson interrupted, holding up one calloused hand. Buck, Ruby, you all might want to come see this. From the surrounding fields emerged more farmers. Buck Martinez rolled up in his rusty tractor, the ancient diesel engine coughing out black smoke. Ruby Jackson, owner of the local diner, carried a pitchfork in one hand and a jug of lemonade in the other. Old Bill Cooper brought his prized shovel, and the Peterson twins showed up with a collection of gardening tools that looked like they'd been passed down through generations. Lieutenant Prezax, monitoring from orbit, updated the Admiral. Sir, we're tracking more humans approaching the deployment zone. They appear to be bringing refreshments. Indeed, Ruby had set up a folding table and was pouring lemonade into paper cups. Thought you space folks might be thirsty after coming all this way, she called out to the bewildered Legion. Commander Vexeter's sensor array was going haywire. According to his readouts, these humans showed absolutely zero fear responses. Their heart rates were steady, their body language casual, as if they were attending a Sunday social, rather than facing down the galaxy's most fearsome warriors. Now then, Henderson said, walking up to the nearest Legionnaire and rapping their armor with his pitchfork. The sound rang out like a church bell. That's some fancy equipment you got there. Reminds me of the time my grandson tried to show me his new gaming computer. Lots of lights and humming, but can it pull a stump? The Legionnaire, trained to face the most terrifying threats in the known universe, found himself speechless as this elderly human critiqued his multi-million credit battle armor like it was a poorly maintained tractor. Formation Delta, Commander Vexetor barked, trying to regain control of the situation. His troops moved to surround the farmers, plasma rifles charged, and gravity generators spinning up. Henderson just smiled and stuck his pitchfork into the soil. You know what's interesting about Iowa farmland? He asked, as more farmers emerged from the corn, carrying everything from rusty wrenches to ancient scythes. The soil here, it's got a special quality to it. Something about the mineral content. He winked at Commander Vexetor. Plays real funny with sensitive electronic equipment. As if on cue, several Legionnaire's armor systems started sparking, their gravity generators fluctuating wildly. Commander Vexetor's own sensors began displaying nonsensical readings about quantum field disruptions emanating from the very ground beneath their feet. Now then, Henderson said, picking his pitchfork back up. Shall we discuss the proper way to treat a man's cornfield? The Legion was about to learn why Earth's farmers had a reputation for being particularly stubborn about their property rights. Commander Vexetor had finally had enough of the agricultural theatrics. Crimson Legion, engage! He roared, his armor's speakers making the cornstalks shake. Show these primitives the futility of resistance. The first Legionnaire charged forward, plasma rifle humming with enough power to vaporize a tank. Henderson watched the approach with the same expression he used when assessing an underripe tomato, then casually sidestepped. The movement was so natural, so unhurried, that the Legionnaire's targeting system completely failed to predict it. You know, Henderson drawled, pivoting his pitchfork like he was turning compost, these tools weren't just made for farming. The pitchfork's tines caught a gap in the Legionnaire's armor joint, and with the practiced motion of someone who'd spent decades lifting hay bales, Henderson executed a perfect lever action. The elite warrior went flying into an irrigation ditch with a spectacular splash. Assessment incorrect, the Legionnaire sputtered, his advanced armor systems fritzing from the combination of muddy water and mineral-rich soil. Subject displays combat proficiency inconsistent with agricultural occupation. Buck Martinez chose that moment to rev up his ancient tractor. Hey, Ruby, he called out, steering the rattling machine toward a group of confused Legionnaires. Remember when we modified old Bessie here with that magnetic harvesting attachment? Ruby Jackson grinned, pouring another glass of lemonade. Sure do, Buck. Pulls nails right out of old fence posts from 20 feet away. The tractor's jury-rigged electromagnet, originally designed to collect stray metal from the fields, suddenly activated. 3 legionnaires found their liquid metal armor responding to the magnetic field in ways their training had never covered. They stumbled forward, tripping over each other like newborn calves. Meanwhile, the Peterson twins had broken out their collection of fertilizer sprayers. "You boys ever wonder what happens when you mix certain agricultural chemicals?" one twin asked, pumping the sprayer with a wicked grin. A fine mist descended on a squad of legionnaires, and their advanced armor's surface suddenly began to oxidize at an alarming rate. "Fascinating reaction," Lieutenant Presax commented from orbit, furiously taking notes. "The chemical composition of their fertilizers appears to be creating a cascading failure in our armor's molecular bonding." Commander Vexator watched in horror as his elite troops were systematically dismantled by farming implements. "Impossible! We are the Crimson Legion. We have conquered 1,000 worlds." "Maybe so," Henderson replied, using his pitchfork to vault over a plasma burst with the agility of someone a third his age. "But bet none of those worlds had to deal with Midwest topsoil and 7 generations of stubborn farmers." Old Bill Cooper had managed to get behind several legionnaires and was casually disconnecting coolant lines with his rusty wrench. "Reminds me of fixing the combine during harvest," he commented. "Always something coming loose." The Legion's formation was rapidly deteriorating. Their advanced targeting systems couldn't seem to track targets moving at the slow, deliberate pace of people who measured their days by sunrise and sunset, rather than military timetables. Every attempt to establish a tactical advantage was met with generations of practical problem-solving experience. "Sir," a panicked legionnaire reported to Commander Vexator, "their primitive tools are interfacing with our armor in ways that defy physics, and Subject Henderson appears to be, quote, getting real tired of our shenanigans," end quote. Indeed, Henderson had planted his feet in the rich Iowa soil, pitchfork held like a staff of office. "You know what we do with troublemakers during harvest season?" he asked, his voice carrying across the battlefield. The other farmers moved to flank him, each holding their tools with the quiet confidence of people who used them daily. "Form up! Standard Combat Protocol 7, Commander Vexator ordered, but his troops were too busy dealing with the effects of various fertilizers, improvised electromagnetic fields, and the absolutely baffling way their armor kept shorting out whenever they stepped in certain patches of dirt. "Admiral," Lieutenant Presax reported to the ship, his voice tinged with disbelief, "the humans appear to be herding our troops using traditional livestock management techniques." Sure enough, the farmers had begun a coordinated pattern of movements that seemed random at first, but was actually forcing the Legion into increasingly disadvantageous positions. It was the same technique they used to guide stubborn cattle, applied to the galaxy's most elite fighting force. "Well now," Henderson called out, as another legionnaire went tumbling into the irrigation ditch. "Seems to me you folks have a choice to make. We can either keep this up all day, or—" He paused to spit a stream of tobacco juice onto a legionnaire's visor, shorting out their heads-up display. "You can join us for some of Ruby's lemonade and discuss the proper way to treat a farmer's field." The Crimson Legion was beginning to learn a crucial lesson about Earth. Sometimes the most dangerous opponents were the ones who looked the least threatening. Admiral Krelthax watched in mounting horror as the tactical display showed his elite forces being systematically dismantled by what appeared to be the rural equivalent of a neighborhood watch. "What do you mean they're using cornfields as cover? Just burn the plants down." "Negative capability, sir," a legionnaire's panicked voice crackled through the command channel. "The plants appear to be genetically modified. Our plasma weapons are being absorbed by some kind of enhanced photosynthesis process." Henderson's voice cut through the communications. 7 generations of careful breeding for pest resistance, he explained, sounding like he was giving a tour at a county fair. "Though I suppose you space folks count as a new kind of pest." The tactical situation had devolved into something that defied every military handbook in the Galactic Federation. Old Man Henderson had divided the farmers into what he called working groups, each employing different traditional farming techniques against the supposedly invincible armor of the Crimson Legion. "Group Alpha, show them how we deal with stubborn mules," Henderson called out, leading a flanking maneuver through the soybean field. The Peterson twins responded by deploying their vintage manure spreaders, now repurposed as improvised artillery. The uniquely caustic combination of organic materials began eating through the Legion's armor like hot butter. "Sir," Lieutenant Prezax reported, his antennae twitching in distress, "our armor's autonomous repair systems are being overwhelmed by fertilizer compounds." "Impossible." Admiral Krelthax slammed all four hands onto his command console. "Those suits are designed to withstand cosmic radiation." "Cosmic radiation ain't got nothing on 40 years of experimental composting," Buck Martinez drawled over the hijacked command channel. He had modified his combine harvester with what appeared to be random pieces of farm equipment, creating a vehicle that somehow disrupted the Legion's gravity manipulation systems. Commander Vexitor attempted to rally his troops, but found himself confronted by Ruby Jackson, wielding a rolling pin with disturbing expertise. "You know," she said, deflecting a plasma burst with the well-seasoned kitchen implement, "this reminds me of that time I had to chase off those corporate folks who wanted to buy up all our family farms." The Legion's advanced battlefield coordination systems were being undermined by the simple fact that the farmers communicated through a complex system of nods, whistles, and cryptic phrases that had evolved over decades of working together. Their battle computers couldn't decode orders like "same as the winter of 82 inches" or "do it like we fixed Thompson's tractor." "Group Bravo, give them the full silo treatment," Henderson's voice rang out. A dozen farmers began deploying modified grain augers, creating a swirling vortex of plant matter that played havoc with the Legion's sensor arrays. Admiral Krelthax watched in disbelief as his elite warriors were corralled into what the humans called a feed lot. The farmers had somehow turned the entire battlefield into a carefully orchestrated trap, using generations of animal handling experience to predict and control their opponents' movements. "Update from ground forces," Lieutenant Prezax announced, his professional tone cracking slightly. "The humans are now using something called a square dance formation to systematically disable our troops. They appear to be calling out dance moves while dismantling our most advanced weapons." Indeed, Henderson had taken position on top of a grain silo, calling out directions like an auctioneer at a county fair. "Allemande left around that plasma cannon. Do past their force field. Swing your partner into that puddle of electromagnetic disabling mud." The Legion's attempts to adapt were frustrated by the simple fact that their advanced combat algorithms couldn't process the seemingly random but devastatingly effective tactics. When they tried to establish a defensive perimeter, they found the farmers had already rerouted the irrigation systems to create impassable mud pits. Their attempts at aerial superiority were thwarted by decades-old weather vanes that somehow interfered with their flight stabilizers. "Sir," Commander Vexitor's voice was almost unrecognizable through the static, "we are encountering technical difficulties. The humans appear to be using something called WD-40 to—" "Sir, our armor is simply sliding apart." Admiral Krelthax's mandibles clacked in frustration as he watched his supposedly invincible army being undone by what appeared to be a collection of improvised tools and folk wisdom. "How?" he demanded. "How are they doing this?" The answer came from Henderson, who had patched himself into the command channel using what appeared to be a modified CB radio. "Simple, really," he explained, while using his pitchfork to redirect another Legionnaire into a strategically placed compost heap. "When you've spent your whole life fixing things that break down, dealing with unpredictable weather, and keeping ancient equipment running with nothing but baling wire and determination, you learn a thing or two about problem solving." The final straw came when the farmers unveiled their secret weapon, a contraption they called the Rube Goldberg Defense System, a bewildering array of pulleys, levers, and repurposed farm equipment that somehow managed to completely nullify the Legion's remaining technological advantages. "Admiral," Lieutenant Prezax reported, his voice hollow, "our threat assessment algorithms have finally finished processing. They categorize this situation as, and I quote, Completely unprecedented. Recommend immediate tactical withdrawal while dignity remains partially intact. As if to punctuate this assessment, Henderson's voice crackled through once more. Now, before you folks make any more poor decisions, Ruby just pulled a fresh batch of cornbread from the oven. Maybe we ought to discuss terms over a proper meal. The retreat of the Crimson Legion would go down in galactic history as the most bizarrely casual military defeat ever recorded. Commander Vexitor, his once pristine armor now covered in a mixture of mud, corn silk, and what appeared to be Ruby's secret barbecue sauce, stood before Old Man Henderson to formally surrender. In accordance with Galactic Military Protocol Section 7, Subsection 3, Commander Vexitor began, his voice modulator crackling from moisture damage, I hereby— Oh, put a sock in it, son, Henderson interrupted, leaning on his pitchfork. Just promise to fix my irrigation system and we'll call it square. He gestured to the crater-filled cornfield. And maybe help with the harvest, since you folks trampled half my good rows. Admiral Krelthax watched the proceedings from orbit, all four of his hands covering his face in mortification. The tactical display showed his elite troops, the pride of the Galactic Federation, being taught proper composting techniques by elderly humans in overalls. For the official record, Lieutenant Prezax noted, unable to keep the amusement from his voice, the Crimson Legion is currently engaged in, quote, learning how to properly stack hay bales because, and I quote directly from Farmer Henderson, they might as well make themselves useful while they're here. The scene below had transformed from a battlefield into what the humans called a potluck dinner. Ruby Jackson had set up multiple folding tables laden with comfort food and was currently teaching a group of bewildered legionnaires how to shuck corn. No, no, dear, she could be heard saying to a warrior whose armor was specifically designed for destroying capital ships. You've got to peel it like this, or you'll get silk in your teeth. Buck Martinez had several troops helping him repair his tractor, though their advanced engineering knowledge seemed to be more hindrance than help. Look, he explained patiently to a confused alien technician, sometimes you just got to hit it with a wrench and say a prayer. The Peterson twins had organized an impromptu class on soil composition, explaining to increasingly fascinated Legion scientists why their advanced technology had failed so spectacularly. See, the mineral content in Iowa topsoil has some unique properties, one twin explained. Mix that with 7 decades of experimental fertilizers and, well— He gestured to a legionnaire whose armor was still slowly dissolving. From the command ship, the bridge crew watched in stunned silence as their invasion force was thoroughly integrated into what appeared to be a community picnic. Admiral Krelthax received the final insult when Henderson's voice came through on the main channel. By the way, Admiral, the farmer drawled, your boys down here mentioned something about quantum shield generators. Well, we got an old windmill that's been squeaking something fierce. Think they could take a look at it while they're here. Captain Melthora, trying desperately to maintain her professional composure, updated the official log. Day 1 of the Earth invasion has concluded with the Crimson Legion being repurposed as temporary farmhands. Current activities include barn painting, fence mending, and learning the words to something called Take Me Home, Country Roads. The final status report from Commander Vexitor simply read, Request immediate reassignment to literally anywhere else in the galaxy. These humans are terrifying. Also, attached is Ruby Jackson's recipe for apple pie, which the troops insist is vital intelligence. As the sun set over the Iowa cornfields, the most feared military force in the galaxy found itself sitting on hay bales, eating homemade pie, and receiving detailed lectures about crop rotation from people who had defeated them with nothing more than farming implements and stubborn determination. Henderson's only comment on the victory, while watching the Legion troops awkwardly attempt square dancing in their damaged armor, was a simple, Yep, sometimes the best way to handle trouble is to put it to work. Official report to the Galactic Council from Admiral Krelthax. Subject: Earth, Sol 3, invasion attempt, classification, extremely dangerous, do not approach. Esteemed Council members, it is with great embarrassment that I must report the complete failure of our military operation on Earth. The Crimson Legion, our most elite fighting force was decisively defeated by what can only be described as a coalition of agricultural specialists armed with primitive tools. Of particular note is the necessity to reclassify Earth from threat level, negligible to threat level, extremely dangerous, with the following addendum. Approach with extreme caution, especially if you encounter elderly humans with farming implements. I must also report the loss of 17 legionnaires to what the humans call retirement. They have chosen to remain on Earth, having been, in their words, seduced by the concept of organic farming and something called square dancing. Lieutenant Prezax added a supplementary note. Special warning regarding Iowa topsoil. Its properties defy our current understanding of physics. Recommend immediate research funding. Back on Earth, life had returned to its normal rhythm. Old Man Henderson stood in his cornfield, pitchfork in hand, examining the newly sprouting crops. The craters from the invasion had been filled in, the irrigation system repaired. And if you did not know better, you would never guess that this had been the site of a decisive victory against the galaxy's most advanced military force. You know, Henderson remarked to his cat, watching a former Crimson Legion warrior carefully operating a combine harvester in the distance. Reckon those space folks learned something important about humans. The cat meowed questioningly. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in the universe ain't fancy weapons or advanced technology. He paused to spit a stream of tobacco juice onto a perfectly tilled row. Sometimes it is just an old farmer who is real particular about his corn. With that profound observation, Henderson turned back to his daily chores. After all, the cows still needed milking, invasion or no invasion. End transmission, archived in galactic records under reasons not to invade agricultural planets.